Okay, as I bring Hal Lindsey on, I really want to read you, no, I'm not going to read you anything. I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what happened to us today here in Pahrump, Nevada, my little hometown of Pahrump, Nevada, where not much is supposed to happen. But early this morning, as you know, my wife and I own KNYE FM 95.1, plug. And we are the voice here in Pahrump, the radio voice in Pahrump, the radio voice. Now, a very early morning, we got a call from the school superintendent's office saying they were evacuating the high school, and could we please make an announcement very quickly? Well, we just screamed out of here and went down to the station and began covering this odyssey, which goes roughly as follows. A 15-year-old juvenile here in Pahrump on one of the buses that came by, got on the bus, forced the bus driver and two children off the bus with a machete, a gigantic machete, and then promptly took the bus toward Armagosa at about speeds of about 70 miles an hour. I mean, here's a school bus screaming along at 70 miles an hour with sheriff's deputies and all giving chase. And as he got to Armagosa, that's across the California border, about 1 mile from Armagosa, Inyo County Sheriff's deputies put out spike strips, and he saw them, and I guess veered off into the desert, rolled that school bus, and then, of course, was immediately swarmed on and arrested. However, that was only, unfortunately, the beginning of the story. No reason there to evacuate a high school, except that, you see, when they arrested him, they found papers in his backpack that indicated he had plans to blow up the Pahrump High School, to blow it up. He had detailed plans in there, the high school, and there was a discussion of a gas bomb. And, so obviously, with recent American history in mind, the school was appropriately and promptly evacuated. And we went to the radio station and covered this in great detail for the community. I mean, we had sheriff's office personnel on the telephone, interviewing them live on the air. We had people from the school district live, interviewing them on the air at KNYE. And fortunately, of course, it's turned out, I guess, okay. And they didn't find a bomb. It may well be he did not yet have an opportunity to carry his plans through, but obviously nobody's going to take any chance like that. It now turns out, we hear there's another individual involved who has been arrested as well, apparently another juvenile. So there may be conspiracy involved here as well. I mean, it's just an incredible story. He was going to blow up the entire high school. So that's what happened today, and we spent our morning covering all of this live for the town. It's what I call a head shaker. You just can't possibly understand why, and of course he is described as a quiet youngster, good and quiet youngster otherwise, why this kind of thing begins to happen. It's just a head shaker, one of many things that you just can't figure out why they're happening. Well, maybe there is a reason. Maybe there's a reason why they're happening, and maybe Hal Lindsey might know what it is. Hal, welcome to the program.
Oh, boy, that's a curveball. Listen, that is really, it's happening in many places.
I know.
It's awesome when it happens right in your hometown.
Yeah, little hometown.
Yeah.
It's the kind of place you move to get away from the city and that sort of thing, which is what I brought up to an officer, a sheriff's department here, Wade Leesky, our sheriff. Boy, what a job they did in getting all this done right, but thank God. But, it could have gone the other way. I mean, why that any child would want to blow up his entire high school, kill all of his classmates and teachers, and what's going wrong with our children?
Yeah, boy. Well, something comes to mind right away. I always see things in the light of how the ancient prophets predicted things would come together in a scenario just before the end of time as we know it. And there is a prophecy in 2 Timothy chapter 3 that talks about this very thing.
Well, that's why I read. It starts out with weather, and I could spend the rest of the whole show on that. I won't. I will say, though, that today in Maryland, of all places, they had an F5 tornado. Now, there has never been in all of history.
Incredible.
In all of history, Hal, there's never been an F5 tornado, 260-mile-per-hour winds recorded in the state of Maryland, ever. But that's just today's story. We get stories the poles are melting, north and south.
Yeah.
The Navy's anticipating a new sea at the North Pole and trying to figure out how they're going to cover it. We have got major ice break-offs from Larsen B went into the water down in the Antarctic. Changes are occurring rapidly now, all over the world, weather-wise.
Well, this is something that is amazing, Art, because, some of these things have happened before in history, but the unique thing to our time is that they're all happening in concert with each other at the same time. Mm-hmm. That's what's unusual because, a lot of people say when you go through the predicted signs, the Bible, what's going to come together at the last time, they say, well, those things have happened before. And in isolation, these things have happened before. Mm-hmm. But what Jesus said was when you see all these things happening, recognize I'm at the door.
Well, then he's at the door. Plagues, mysterious, untreatable diseases. I get to read about a new one almost every night.
Let me read something about this breakdown in children in the last days. This is from 2 Timothy chapter 3. It says,
yes, please.
But realize this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, without natural affection, unreconcilable, malicious, gossipers, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, and so on. Now, one of the things thrown in the midst of all of this that seems to almost not fit is it says disobedient to parents. Mm-hmm. And you see here basically a breakdown of society.
Well, there's something about honoring your parents.
That's right. In other words, starting back, at least in our part of the world, starting back with Dr. Spock, there began to be a breakdown in authority in the home. And a lot of liberalized education and so forth set in. And what happened was a general breakdown in what had been the traditional family order of things. And once that broke down, given a few generations, it just began to increase geometrically in breakdown. So now we have parents that are afraid of their children. I mean, and rightly so. I mean,
we do. It's true.
When there is a breakdown in discipline in the home and a breakdown of love and care given to children, it results in anxiety and anger. And so many, I think it's something like 65% of parents today, both parents work. And so there's not even anything resembling the traditional family relationship anymore. And you can't just, children can't be left to themselves. They have to be guided. They have to be disciplined. But you can't discipline them out of just being angry and trying to relieve yourself of being troubled. You have to discipline them with love and with consistency.
But Hal, there must be some other difference, because even in quotes here, the good old days, lots of people came from broken and dysfunctional families and proceeded to be okay anyway. These days, many fewer number coming from broken and dysfunctional families, and frankly, some coming from very good families.
Sure.
It's almost as though real evil.
Well, that's a factor too. I know what you're driving at. There is an evil spirit about in the land that goes, and the society in general is breaking down, and so even if a child comes from a relatively good home, he can be greatly influenced by the general society. So anyway, that's a side note to what I usually think about, but definitely you can see it taking place.
All right. Well, I keep up on this kind of news intentionally. Here's a story that just got to my desk tonight. The headline is, Mysterious Virus Causes Alarm in Greece. Greece's health ministry on Tuesday ordered all schools and universities closed.
Yes,
that's all of them. Through the end of the week, after more than 13 people appeared to be suffering from an unidentified virus that had claimed 3 lives, long lines of people who feared they might be infected at hospitals and clinics, and they're really going berserk over there. This is just tonight's story.
Mm-hmm.
Hal,
yeah, I read about that. It's a new kind of virus that it affects the heart. Apparently, it infects the heart around the cardiac sac, and it could be really lethal. And they still don't know what's causing it. It's really something.
Well, as I sort of tick through your list here, weather, plagues, mysterious and untreatable diseases. We've even got new insects that are beginning to appear, predator-type insects. Earthquakes, earthquakes, we're having lots of those. Volcanic activity, a lot of rumbling going on right now. Famines, warfare and rumors of war. And then there's what happened in New York and the war in Afghanistan. And I don't know that we're missing anything on the list here, are we?
Not much.
Mm-hmm. What does the end of history? What does the end of history mean, Hal?
Well, it's the end of history as we know it. The real, what I call the most important signs that the Bible predicts will come together in concert with each other just before all of this comes to a climax. It all starts with Israel. It starts with that as the key. No prophetic sign was really relevant until the dispersed people of Israel, who've been scattered for almost 2,000 years,
came together,
would come back together. That really started the whole prophetic countdown. So in 1948, after they had been gathering there, here's a people that had their nation destroyed. They were driven into exile, literally into every nation there to heaven, exactly as Moses predicted they would be. And here they're driven all over the world, and they remained virtually a nation in exile. They remained a distinct people for almost 2,000 years. And then they suddenly, against all odds, began to return to the land from which they had been driven. And then again, under impossible odds, they become a nation again. Now, this has caused the whole world a great deal of problems. It's never happened before. It's unique. No people has ever been driven from their country, driven from their land, scattered in that kind of dispersion. And they weren't hospitably treated wherever they went. They were persecuted everywhere. And to survive as a distinct people and then to go back and put a reclaim on their land and become a state again. This is just something unique in history.
We're so close to a war there now.
Exactly. And this is exactly what is predicted. For instance, in the prophecies of Ezekiel, 2,650 years ago, he predicted this. In chapters 36 through 39, he takes us right through a systematic chronological order of what would happen. He talks about them returning to a land that would be completely destroyed, that would be like the surface of the moon, that would be so destroyed. And that when these people would begin to return, that the land would begin to respond to them. And then he talks about the fact that all the people of the surrounding nations who had usurped that land would begin to fight against them. And that they would, of course, all of the surrounding nations are Muslim.
Hal, in your view, even with the best of intentions of our president and people all over the world, I mean, even some nations that have not made peace overtures are making them now. Will all of that ultimately predictably, inevitably fail?
Yes, it will. There will be a time. There's a time coming when a great leader will rise in Rome, and he will become the leader of the European nations over there. He will go in and he will make a kind of a peace between these two ancient peoples. You know, the really amazing thing is that the two peoples that are warring there are from the same forefather, Abraham. Mm-hmm. And they've been at odds with each other for 4,000 years. And so the fact that they're warring with each other, it's all something that's both in history and in prophecy. But according to these predictions, they will continue to be in a conflict until they draw the whole world into it. And this leader from Rome will appear to make a permanent solution to it. This will break down and war will break out, which will draw the whole world into it.
And who will this individual be?
Well, he's a man that we don't... I believe he's alive somewhere in the world right now. I don't know who he is.
The Antichrist?
The Bible calls him the Antichrist, yes.
Many now believe he is alive in the world, and the time is ticking away. Time. Hal, hold on for a second. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm Art Bell. Talking about disease, here's one that strikes pretty close to home, too. This comes from the University of Phoenix online. I've got to read about it, read about my hometown down in Arizona, I guess, huh? More than 2 months after 2 rural Nevada residents were diagnosed with active contagious tuberculosis, dozens of people with whom they came in contact continue to receive antibiotic treatments in hopes of preventing further active cases. And the residents of the Nye County town in which the cases occurred are still seething because they were never notified of any sort of health problem in their midst. The 2 contagious people were isolated immediately after the disease was discovered in February in Armagosa Valley, that's a neighboring town, community of about 1,200 people, 75 miles north of Las Vegas. Officials from the Nevada Division of Health and the Centers for Disease Control descended on the town to investigate the outbreak, but never shared their findings with any local residents who only learned of this in the sort of by the grapevine. The silence is deafening, according to Nancy Fisher, worried whether she might be at risk or what are we being exposed to. In March, she wrote the Nevada Division of Health in Carson City, seeking some sort of answer. She has yet to get any kind of reply. We're in very, very strange times. And with Hal Lindsey, you know, I wonder, as we discuss the inevitability of what's going on, the biblical inevitability of what's going on in the Middle East right now, I've always worried myself about this. There's this concept of free will, and it seems in some way to clash with biblical inevitability. In other words, we make some choices, maybe small ones, but no matter what choices we make, this is going to happen.
I think I've wrestled with that plenty of times, but, you know, when you deal with God, who's the source of prophecy, he's a person that is not only with foreknowledge, but also everlasting existence. So there never was a time when he didn't know all things that were going to happen. But here's where I have to reconcile it. I don't believe the fact that God foreknows certain things means that he makes them happen. I believe man has a certain degree of free will, and God just simply knew the way he would use that will and predicted it. So,
but can't millions of people with free will make some other choice that doesn't allow history to unwind the way it's going to anyway? I really struggle with that, Al.
Yeah, I know. But there is a certain, the Bible says there's a fallen nature in man, and that though man has freedom of choice, he usually drifts toward the wrong way with the choices. And the marvel of God working with man is that he's able to redeem man and to put a new spirit in him and to give him the ability to make choices along the way that will be good for them and will be along with his will. But the majority of the world will never come to know God. And they freely choose not to.
If this is so, if all of these signs, which seem so strong right now, and they are all occurring at once. Maybe maybe you can tell me and everybody else, if it is the end, if it's the end of history as we know it, what's going to happen? How will this come down?
Well, the way it will really unfold, the event that will trigger this last great war will be a dispute over Jerusalem. And it was predicted by the prophet Zechariah in chapter 12, verses 2 and 3 of his prophecies, where he said, I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone to all nations. And that because of this dispute between the returned Israelites and the surrounding nations who are all Muslim, he said because of this, all nations would eventually gather for war. And that war would break out over this issue. And he even gives the battle plan. It talks about the fact that this leader from the extreme north of reborn Israel will lead a confederacy of all of the surrounding nations, which are all Muslim. So you go to the extreme north of Israel, there's only one nation there, it's Russia. It says that this great northern power, Russia, would arm all of these surrounding nations with lethal weapons and then lead them in this great war where they will come down on Israel, and then that will trigger the West to be brought in, and they will bring a great army in there to fight and decimate the Russian-led Muslim Confederacy, and then there will be met by another power who will come into the Middle East, which is the Asians. Will bring 200 million soldiers into war there.
That would be the last great war, all right.
Oh, yeah.
And it would become nuclear very quickly.
It sure talks about things that sound like nuclear, because what it calls fire and brimstone, and it talks about a third of the population of the earth being killed by fire and brimstone and by what looks like a shower of asteroids hitting the earth. It says that a shower of these asteroid-looking things hit the earth, and then the atmosphere is rolled back on itself, and things begin to disintegrate. So I think he's describing a nuclear war.
Would seem so. Hal, I'm going to ask this, probably an impertinent question. I probably shouldn't be asking this, but I mean, what kind of God unrolls, begins mankind, and then unrolls everything, lets it all get way out of control, and then ends it in fire and brimstone? It's hard to understand that this may be something God knew would happen. Surely God could change this outcome or prevent this outcome, and it's hard to understand and put together one's concept with God and that happening.
Well, he made a decision to give man freedom of choice, and that was a calculated risk, because man managed to the one prohibition that was given to man, he managed to violate, and his nature was fallen. And from that time on, God was in a dilemma, because how could he bring back to himself a creature that was now fallen and unacceptable to him, impossible for man on his own to ever become acceptable again. And so God, though he wasn't obligated to do anything, chose to step out of eternity into time and become a man and take upon himself the guilt for all the human race and die under his own justice. In other words, justice had to be paid. He couldn't just say, well, man has sinned and, we'll just sweep that under the rug. It had to be paid. So he managed to satisfy the demands of his own justice by dying in the place of every man. And then he offered a free forgiveness, a free pardon to anyone who will receive it. And so this is what's offered to man, and yet even so many turn it down. And so when it comes to the end, and there's this great war and so forth, it isn't God doing this. is man allowed to make his own choices, and it's man that brings down.
Well, you say that on the one hand, but on the other hand, you say no matter what we do, no matter what peace initiatives are, it's all inevitably it's going to happen, and it
well, God knows how we're going to choose.
It would appear to be happening.
Yeah, it is. But the way out is to accept the gift of pardon that Jesus Christ died in our place to give us. And the good news, and this may sound like it's really beyond the kingdom of nigh, the good news is God promises that when this begins to unfold, when just before all of this war begins, that God is going to miraculously take out every person who has believed in Him and received that pardon. So those who believe and receive that will not go through it.
So if one were to wake up one day and all the Christians they know are suddenly gone, and all that's and here we are left, gaggling about, wondering what the heck just happened, that would be that'd be a big sign to you, wouldn't it?
It'd be a pretty big sign. I would say it'd be time. It'd be time to think about what those crazy Christians talked about and see if you couldn't get around to receiving the gift of pardon that He offered. There's still time, but those who delay will have to go through that horrible period.
In the meantime, man is making some rather interesting decisions. I've got another story that just broke in front of me. It's Italy doctor says 3 cloned pregnancies exist. Now, while they're not doing it here in the U.S., they're saying 3 women in Italy, not in Italy, I guess actually not in Italy, are pregnant now with clones. So despite all of the controversy and the discussion we've had about cloning, we proceed ahead full speed. And I wonder what we're doing with cloning. Aren't we now getting into the God business?
Yeah, it's getting right into the Genesis account. I think that nothing good can ever come of cloning. We don't know what kind of a person this is going to produce. We have no idea. I mean, this could produce a variant in human nature that could be catastrophic. So we really don't know what the results of that will be. I think that man is really playing with things that
with fire.
He should have. Yes, absolutely.
Well,
fire.
Before they created Dolly, they had a lot of monsters.
Yes,
and I guess it's one thing, with a sheep to say, well, monster, goodbye, and end of experiment. But when you begin to create monster, I don't know what you'd call them. If you'd even call them humans, I guess you would technically. Monster humans. I don't know what you do with them.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It really is. And I mean, there have been abnormalities even in successful clones like Dolly.
That's correct.
There are physical abnormalities. We have it remains to be seen, whether they will live natural lives or what. We've talked a lot about this on my website, HalLindsey.com, where we've gone into this at great length, and I think man is playing with fire.
Well, an interesting thing, just to speculate, the first cloned child apparently is the clone of a very rich Arab man.
Mm.
And so it's kind of interesting that it would be a rich Arab man with what we may have ahead of us.
It could be. Mm-hmm. Could prove to be very interesting.
Here's another.
You remember the movie, The Boys from Brazil?
I sure do.
That was way ahead of its time, wasn't it?
It sure was.
And that's frightening of what can be produced. You just never know. Even in that movie, which, it wasn't based on just imagination. Mengele was definitely trying to reproduce an Adolf Hitler. But
Well, you're going to love this. The doctor doing this said that 2 of the 3 pregnancies were developing in Russia and 1 in a, in quotes, Islamic state, and that they were 6 to 9 weeks along.
This is frightening. I mean, I think that there's no end to heartache and suffering that can come of this.
And then in this country, in fact, around the world, I've got a story here from The Guardian, which I'd like you to react to, too. Mm-hmm. It says 177 priests removed in 28 states suspected of molesting minors have either resigned now or been taken off duty in 28 states in the District of Columbia. Now, I think everybody's pretty well aware of what's going on, the crisis in the Catholic Church with priests. What to say about that, Hal?
I think that's also a sign of the times, just the decline within the church. It talked about the fact that in the church itself there would be a breakout of those who no longer believed in the faith and those who were counterfeit ministers and so forth, false teachers and counterfeit ministers. And, there are a lot of people who call themselves Christians that are not really Christians. They're not born again. They haven't experienced the spiritual birth that changes the nature. And it's sad what's happening in many places.
Before he passed, I interviewed a very interesting Catholic priest, Father Malachi Martin, who said repeatedly that there was real evil within the walls of the Vatican itself.
Yes, he was a good friend of mine. And Malachi Martin had a handle on it like few people I've ever seen. And definitely there is evil within the walls of the Vatican. I mean, let's face it, and it's not exclusive to the Catholic religion or Catholic denomination. There's a general breakdown in human nature going on, and this is just part of what was predicted would take place. It's interesting, we've talked a little bit about plagues, famines, and so forth, but Jesus predicted a number of seemingly unrelated things to look for that would all start coming together in concert with each other. And he said they would be like birth pangs. They would increase in frequency and intensity like a birth pang in a woman about to have a child.
Yeah, like a quickening.
Yes. And he said that, that in that context, he said that there would be, beware that you're not deceived, for many will come in my name, saying I represent Christ. And he said, and they will be false teachers and they will deceive many. That was the first sign he gave. And then he said that nation would rise against nation, ethnic group against ethnic group. There would be wars and rumors of wars. That's his way of saying hot wars and cold wars. And he said all of this would be the beginning of the birth pangs. And then he said there would be famines, there would be earthquakes, there would be plagues, there would be global weather pattern changes. And he said all of these things would begin to happen in the same time frame and increase in frequency and intensity. And I really believe we've got it happening now. I was just reading in Earth Week, this Larsen ice shelf that broke off that you mentioned earlier.
Larsen B.
Yeah, but it says that within about 3 decades, there's some islands they believe that will almost disappear because
that's right.
The level of the water is raising as these icebergs melt. I didn't know the Larsen B was bigger than the island of Sicily.
It's big. Really big. Well, it's not big anymore. It's in a million pieces.
Yeah.
They actually, we live in this modern age where you can actually see satellite, sort of a moving GIF, and you can actually see the entire ice shelf disintegrate.
Yeah.
Into the water. It's the daggonest thing I've ever seen.
It starts calving, as they say. It's frightening to see such And it also says that it's destroying millions of forms of life.
That is correct.
That was in that area.
And the scientists, by the way, looking at Larsen C, which would be the next one in line,
yes.
are saying it doesn't look very stable at all, Hal.
Wow.
But another sign. We'll be back in a moment. Stay right there. A lot of my biblical knowledge of what is to come comes from movies rather than the Bible. And I remember a movie called The Seventh Sign. And in The Seventh Sign, it was the end. I mean, these seals were beginning to be broken open, and I've got the Hollywood version of that. What can you tell me about the seals, Hal?
Yeah, well, the seals, it's a picture of a scroll, and in the ancient times they would you'd have judgments written in a column on a scroll, and then after each one you would have a wax seal that would be affixed.
Okay.
And so when you would open the scroll and begin to read those judgments, you'd have to unroll to the point where there was a wax seal. You'd read that part, then you would break the next seal and read the next part. And that's the imagery that is part of the first stage of judgments in the book of Revelation. There are actually 3 series of judgments. There are 7 judgments in each of the 3. And the first is the judgment of the seals, where these are broken and unraveled, and they begin to read off the judgments that are coming upon man. You know, incidentally, I checked with my statistician while we were going through this last break, Mark Morales, and we say that all of these signs Jesus predicted were going to go through like birth pangs, an increase in frequency and intensity.
Yes.
At the beginning of the 20th century, the average number of killer quakes was between 2 and 6 in each decade, all the way up to the 1950s.
Defined as 8 quakes or better or something?
Or these would be anything over 6.
Over 6, okay.
Yeah. I just looked at year to date. That's from January 1st this year until now. And, of course, we've had a few since this was compiled. There have been 105 earthquakes. Now, here's how it breaks down. Some of them, of course, were under 5, but in the category between a 5 to 6 on the Richter scale, these are categorized as dangerous. They could take life, and they could do some damage. There have been 30. In the category 6 to 7 on the Richter scale, these are usually noted as devastating. These can do much property damage and take much life.
Yes.
There have been 12. And in the category 7 to 9, this is called catastrophic category, like an F5 category in the tornadoes.
Yes.
If they get up over 8, there have been 4 just this year, and we're only in April. So this gives an idea of how things have accelerated. They really have.
Now, another sign would be famines. There are isolated famines, of course, around the world right now. There are many hungry in the world.
Yes.
But I have interviewed many climatologists here on the show, and people talking about this climate change, and now rapid climate change, that so many scientists now believe we're entering a period of rapid climate change.
Right.
They never said that before. You know, it's all long-term, and here we are seeing all these incredible changes within our own lifetimes. I mean, we're seeing them unfold in front of our eyes. Well, the first effect of these gigantic weather changes will be on agriculture.
Right.
And, of course, it's a very short leap from there to famine, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I remember back in the 1970s when they were talking about famines and so forth, and Dr. Charles Paddock wrote a book called Famines, 1975. And he said that would be the time we would reach what he called the age of famines. And he was right on target. That's when we started what officially has been recognized as the age of famines, and that means that there is a major famine going on in some part of the world at all times now. And, of course, a lot of this started off by simply the exponential increase in population.
Well, naturally, more mouths.
That was the first, but that's only one part of it. But just to give you an idea of the exponential part of it is, when I was, it took from the beginning of civilization to 1850 to reach the first 1 billion in population. From 1850 to 1930 to reach the second billion. From 1930 to 1960, the 4th billion. From 60 to 75, the 5th billion. From 75 until just before 2000, over 6 billion.
Yes.
So you can see that exponential effect. But then, at just the time when we need to have more ways of feeding mouths, we see this climate change. And also the disruption of whole populations by war, civil wars and so forth. That's what's devastating Africa and many places like that. And so what you have is a built-in mathematical certainty of terrible famines coming in the future. And, of course, another factor that's going to bring it in is the shortage of fresh water.
Drought. There are going to be water wars.
Yes.
Hal, there are reports now bubbling under of drought all the way across the nation. A terrible, one of the worst droughts we've ever seen. Emergencies beginning to be declared across the country. We're in a severe drought right now. It's underreported.
Well, absolutely.
We're in one right now. It's part of the climate change.
Yes, it is. And, I mean, you will be able to see that probably crops are going to have to be grown further and further north. And one of the things Jesus said to watch for is that as all of this was taking place, that there would be, that men's hearts would fail them for fear at the roaring of the waves of the sea. And in other words, these storms that would be generated around the equatorial belt of the world,
yes,
coming in from the sea, the storms would be of such intensity that even people who were familiar with storms and lived in that area would drop dead from sheer terror just to see the intensity of the storms that are coming upon the world. And when you see all of this developing the way it is, you know something's got to be up. I mean, even if you're not, you said you're not religious.
No.
Well, technically, I'm not either. I'm not I believe in Jesus Christ. I have accepted the gift of pardon that he purchased for me. But, you know, I'm not a real religious man in the sense of running around with a tambourine and things like that. But even if I weren't religious at all, even if I had no faith in this, I would see enough evidence.
Well, you don't need it. If you're just a pragmatic observer, that's all you need to be.
Exactly. You hit it right with pragmatic. There's enough things going on that are unique where something has to be different. You know, may I throw a little commercial out here?
Yep.
I did a series of videos on the prophetic development, and the first one is called The Late Great 20th Century. And then there's 1948, when the end began. There's the Battle for Jerusalem, Where is America in Prophecy, the Great Global Deception, and Myths of the Middle East, Dispelling the Lies. All of these they all contribute together, but if anyone's interested in getting really brought up on these signs, and I'm telling you, all of these were made for non-religious people, they can give me a call at 1-800-TITUS-35. That's like the Roman general Titus, Titus, Titus 35.
Okay.
1-800-TITUS-35. And you know what I did in the late great 20th century? I was astounded because it just kind of gathers up all the things that began to happen in the 20th century, like we rode into the 20th century on horseback. We rode out on space vehicles.
Yeah. Well,
when we went into the 20th century, the most deadly form of military action was a cavalry charge. When we came out, and they came in with horse-drawn cannons, we came out with intercontinental ballistic missiles with multiple warheads.
That's right.
I mean, you know, you just begin to see how all of this has changed. And today, with the advent of computers, they say the entire base of Western knowledge doubles every 6 months.
Well, I know processor speed, I think is 6 months or 18 months or something. And anyway, Hal, look, I just listened to the last newscast. I'm sure you heard part of it. I mean,
yes, I
did. We're going to obviously invade Iraq with a massive force. I mean, they're getting the public ready for it. You can hear it, and you could imagine that in any massive invasion of Iraq, there will be thrown at Israel, probably Jerusalem, weapons of some sort of mass destruction. I mean, it happened last time. It'll happen again.
Well, here's what I think is going to happen. I don't think this is the end, but I think it's what I would call a mini Armageddon. In other words, the stage of prophetic fulfillment hasn't quite reached the stage where the last events will take place. But it's just before.
Fat lady is humming.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen is we'll invade Iraq. And by the way, Iran is much more dangerous than Iraq. But we'll invade Iraq, and what they're going to do is they will probably throw some weapons of mass destruction and missiles over on Israel.
Yep.
Well, Israel has over 400 missiles with nuclear tips on them.
Buried in the desert, we hear.
And they will launch. They have already warned. Anyone launches a weapon of mass destruction on us, we will launch on them.
We're making similar noises. Our country is making similar noises. So is Britain. There have been a lot of changes, even nuclear policy changes.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about using tactical nuclear weapons.
That's right.
If they send any gas or biological weapons on our troops over there.
That's right. It's all warming up. You can see it.
Yeah. So one of the prophecies that is unrelated to Armageddon, but is in some conflict shortly before that, is that Damascus, it's in Isaiah chapter 17, verse 1. It says, Damascus shall become a ruinous heap, and no one will dwell in it again. And Damascus is the longest inhabited city in the world. It has been continuously inhabited for over 3,500 years. And yet it talks about in the last days that something's going to happen that will so obliterate it that there'll be nothing left. And it will be left in a condition where not even an animal will dwell in it. Boy, that sounds like it gets hit with a nuclear weapon.
Sure sounds like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're in an interesting situation now where Muslim fundamentalists, they don't want to make a deal with this. They don't exactly really want us to change policies. They really want us actually dead.
Oh, yeah.
That's hard for us to deal with. I mean, usually you can have peace talks and compromises and do this and do that, but in this situation, when someone just simply wants you dead, it doesn't seem like there's a lot you can do in the way of any sort of compromise and peace initiative, and politics all goes down the drain. I mean, it's just...
Well, our fight against terrorism is doomed already. It was doomed the moment that President Bush got up and said that our enemy is not Islam. It is a few radicals.
You understand why, politically, why he said that.
Yeah, he didn't want to cut the oil valve off, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the problem is this, and I'm sure there are some Muslims out there that don't want to go on a jihad. But if you look at the history of Islam, the Islamic fundamentalist and the radical who's ready to pull his sword and go on a jihad to spread Islam is not the radical. He is the heart of what the Quran teaches.
Mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, that's mainstream. Look at, if anyone should understand the Quran, it should have been Muhammad. What did he do? Well, he drew the sword, gathered an army, and went out and started spreading Islam with a sword. And that's the heart and center of it. I mean, their goal is to bring the whole world under Islam, which means in submission to Allah. That's and they feel that is their mission. And so when you look at the fact there are 1.3 billion Muslims in the world today, and that there are more mosques in England than there are churches, you begin to get the dimension of what we're up against.
So short of our conversion, rather unlikely, they want us dead.
Right.
Convert or die.
And of course they want to destroy America because we've helped Israel keep a foothold in what they consider their third holiest site. And so that's unforgivable to an Islamic fundamentalist. They feel that it is their duty to hit us.
The so-called 11th hijacker, Mazari, that's all he's saying is he wants the destruction of America.
Right.
Whenever he gets a chance to open his mouth, that's all he says. He wants us destroyed.
Exactly.
Doesn't want us to change policy. Doesn't want us to convert. Has given up on that. Just wants us dead.
Now, when you consider that a minimum of 10% of the 1.3 billion Muslims in the world are Islamic fundamentalists, well, you know, just off the top, that's what 130 million people that would like to see us dead.
So we can't win this war.
No. I believe that there'll be a jockeying around, but ultimately this is going to come to it's going to come to Armageddon.
You have to wonder how it could unwind. Could you ultimately be wrong about, for example, a U.S. invasion of Iraq, a full-on invasion to topple the government and Saddam Hussein? That could easily bring other countries into it. In addition to maybe a real hot kind of war with Israel, it could bring other nations in.
Well, I think it will do that. But I think what will happen is that it will produce such a horrific effect that the world will be terrified and say at all costs we've got to solve this Muslim Israeli problem. And that's when the Antichrist will step in and seemingly produce a solution to it. And
that's when people like you will say who he is, right? And then I guess you have to fear for your life at that point. Because he'll be a real popular guy for a while, right?
Well,
isn't that the way it's written?
Yeah.
We'll be right back. We're at the bottom of the hour. You definitely might want to, religious or not, you might want to call and get a series of tapes Hal's talking about. The number again is 1-800-TITUS-35, 1-800-TITUS-35. Those are good numbers, easy to remember, I think, 1-800-TITUS-35. Do you know what the actual numbers are to that?
Yes, I do. It's 1-800-848-8735.
Thank you. Some people are not good that way, and they like the numbers. Listen, somebody reminds me, it's Anthony in Phoenix who says, look, I get these computer messages while we're doing the show. Hello, Mr. Bell. Would you please ask Hal if he knows has any idea why you saw this huge zodiac in that church you visited in Rome? I was in the Vatican, and came out of the Sistine Chapel right as you come out. Here's this gigantic globe in the Sistine Chapel, and the globe is divided into the 12 signs of the zodiac. And I looked at that, and I realized I was in the Vatican, and I said, what? What's this doing in the Sistine Chapel? There were apparently some old influences in the church that somehow or another I never thought were there. It really shocked me.
Yes, and this may be why the book of Revelation calls it Mystery Babylon.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe so, huh?
Yeah, because, the first religion man ever followed was built around astrology and on the plains of Shinar and what became known as Babel, and that's where Babylon came from. But the first religion man ever had was built around the stars, the study of the stars. And it's interesting how that has been passed down
isn't it?
From one religious system to another, and it's disturbing that you find it also resident within the Vatican.
There is an increasing global anti-Semitism now. I mean, obviously there is, and it's really increasing quickly. That would be climbing the same hill.
Yes.
Or rolling down the same hill, depending on how you look at it, right?
Right. This is definitely something that's predicted, and that, as a matter of fact, when God called Abraham and he gave him promises and covenants, he set him apart because he was going to create from him a nation that would be his special representatives on earth. And God knew that this was going to make him a target. And so he gave him promises of protection where he said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. Mm-hmm. Now, God has disciplined the Jews down through history, but he reserves the right to discipline them to himself. And when somebody else tries to take that in hand, God promises that they will pay for it in the end. And yet, one of the mysteries of history has been this tremendous hatred toward the Jewish people.
Again and again.
Yes.
It comes.
And, by the way, the name Jew has been indiscriminately applied to all of the descendants of Abraham, called the Israelites. But technically, that's a term that was applied first in Babylon when the 3 tribes from the southern kingdom were taken captive there, the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. And because they came from a place called Judea, they called them Judeans, or as it was in that language, Jew. And that stuck with them, and now it's been applied to all the other tribes as well.
As all of this unfolds, Hal, you said earlier, America's role. You mentioned America's role.
Yes.
And it all seems to unwind in the Middle East. What is America's role as this all unfolds?
Well, I've been studying prophecy now for 46 years, and one of the most disturbing things to me, Art, is that as you look at the lineup of nations in the last configuration, and the Bible has ways of predicting nations that exist today. And as I look at this, there is nothing even intimated about the United States. Now, many other nations are definitely predicted. Mm-hmm. But there is absolutely nothing about the United States being a significant power, even to be mentioned in the last days. Now, that has bothered me because that means that, one, we will be diminished in power to the point where we will not be a significant power. One thing we know for sure is that the power of the West must shift to Europe in a revived Roman Empire with Rome as its capital. And I see I've been looking for 46 years, I look for the United States of Europe to appear, even though they'd tried it for centuries and it never worked. And I believe the EU is the beginning.
So we may not even be part of the final act.
We may not be, because we could well be destroyed before that. And so when this happened on 9/11, that really set some bells off, because just 4 months before that, I had just made the video called "Where is America in Prophecy?" And I said that if I'm correct, something catastrophic is going to happen to the United States soon.
And that was when did you say that?
I said that 4 months before November 11th.
September 11th.
September 11th.
September 11th. Oh, my. Everybody has the feeling. I guess we've rampaged our way through Afghanistan, and a lot of American people now have the feeling that, it's getting safe again. It's over. It looks like we've routed these bad guys out. It's just not like that, is it, Hal?
No. It's kind of like, when the clouds are gathering static electricity just before an electric storm and a thunderbolt bursts loose. That's what I see it as right now. I see these Islamic fundamentalists gathering power quietly, like static electricity being gathered in a cloud, a thundercloud. And all of a sudden, without warning, there's a massive thunderbolt. And I believe that's about the way it's going to happen. I really do believe, first of all, in a democracy that treasures freedom like we do, it's virtually impossible to protect ourselves against a determined enemy that is willing to give his life to hit us. And there just happens to be hundreds of thousands of people like that are trained, dedicated, and ready to give their life to do significant damage to us. And I think it's only a matter of time
so then all of that
before they use a nuclear device on us.
Apparently so. Yes, a lot of rumors about that. And about the fact that they may have nuclear devices of one sort or another, dirty bombs, whatever. It's all over the news.
Yeah.
And all of these signs, I don't know, they seem to be there. They seem to be there in increasing amounts. And so I guess a lot of people, a lot of sort of non-religious people can't help but look at this, as I said earlier, just pragmatic people, and sort of nervously say, "Oh, gee, that kind of sounds like what you're talking about. Maybe this is the beginning." What is also? I wanted to ask you about these horsemen, these horsemen of the apocalypse. What sort of modern how do you imagine that?
Well, those are, of course, allegorical figures that are depicting something, but I can reel them off here. The first horseman is the man on the white horse who comes forth with a crown conquering, and that is the Antichrist. That's depicting the judgment where the Antichrist is going to be turned loose on the world. And the world's going to think he's the best man that's ever lived. He's the answer. He's the one that's going to bring the world out of this terrible period of war.
And by the way, why do you believe he is alive now? What leads you to believe he is alive now?
Because of the development of the scenario, the predicted scenario. It's at the time point right now where he has to be alive in order to fit in with the timing of the prophetic scenario. And then there's the second horseman. It's the red horse. And this horseman depicts the fact that it says he takes peace from the earth. Now that means there must have been a period of peace. So this would be the peace that the Antichrist establishes.
Right.
And so it says that he takes peace from the earth and provides that men should slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. Well, in the original Greek, the word slay is not the normal word. It's a word for utterly slaughter. He says, and a great sword is given. Of course, the sword in ancient literature is a symbol of weapons. And it says it's a great sword. So this means that in this war, there will be tremendous weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, it could be a hydrogen bomb.
Yes.
Today.
So it says that it will take much life. And then the third horseman is a sickly pale color. And it says this one appears, I'm sorry, it's a black horse. He appears with a scale in his hands. And he says, he heard a voice saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Well, a denarius in that day was the average wage of the average worker. So it means a day's wage would buy 1 quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. And it says, do not touch the oil or the wine, which is the luxury thing. So I believe that this one is talking about the great scarcity of food. Once war breaks out, there will be a tremendous scarcity of food worldwide. And then the fourth horseman is the one that's ashen or deadly or deathly pale horse. And it says the one that sat on that is Death and Hades. And it says that he will kill a fourth of the population of the earth with sword, which means with the weaponry of war, with famine, with plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So it's pretty grisly.
Yes, it is. And the first horseman would seem to be galloping.
Yeah. I think that this man, that the conditions for him to be accepted are already being set up.
If you knew with absolute certainty, Hal, where the Antichrist was right now, what would you do?
Well, I would do everything in my power to unveil who he is and what he's going to do. But see, in my understanding of Bible prophecy, I will never know who this man is, because I'll be taken out of the world before he is unveiled. And so will all those who have received the gift of pardon.
There is some controversy about
the timing,
about all of this, even about all of the Christians suddenly being gone. I mean, is there biblical support for the rapture, really?
Yes. Yes, there is. I wrote a book called, in fact, it's relatively new. It's a book called Vanished into Thin Air.
Mm-hmm.
And this book goes into all of the different views on it. And I go into why I believe that all Christians will suddenly and without warning be taken out of the world mysteriously just before this Antichrist is unveiled.
Why is this not, in its own way, as radical a view as the fundamentalists who destroyed the towers in New York and the Pentagon? And in its own way, it's a pretty radical view, isn't it?
It's radical. The difference is we don't think we've got to go out and kill people for our faith. We don't believe that. In other words, to say that you believe something as clearly miraculous as is required for this event to be,
indeed,
is like saying you've lost your mind. And the only reason I believe it, and I do not think I put my brain on the shelf, is because I look back in history and I see where God made predictions of absolutely incredible things, and yet they were fulfilled literally just as he predicted them. And without one failing. I mean, there are hundreds of fulfilled prophecies in history that were made long before they happened, and they all were literally fulfilled. So that's why I dare to believe something as wild and crazy sounding as the rapture.
And yet, the Islamic fundamentalists, for example, believe that if they give their life as a martyr, they're going to go up and they're going to have 70 virgins and all kinds of radical views, blow themselves up, and they're in a land with 70 virgins. That's their reward. What do you say to the non-believers, the atheists, and I have them call the show all the time, who say, look, the religions, referring to all of them, will in fact be our end, that all man's big wars have been about belief and religion. And
I agree. Listen, I agree with that. And that's why I don't believe that true Christianity is a religion. See, religion is man seeking to gain God's acceptance by what he does, to earn God's acceptance through his merit. Christianity says man has no merit and can never be good enough for God to accept.
Mm-hmm.
And so we simply receive a gift of pardon that God offers us, and this puts us into a living personal relationship with God. It's not something you have to strive for. And it's a personal relationship. It's not going about, trying to do things in order to earn God's acceptance. And God changes us from within rather than us trying to change ourselves by our own good deeds and by our own self-will. But I can see where looking at religion as a whole, it must be bewildering.
You could have that view.
Absolutely. I can understand it because
all of us go out and
some of the worst things in history happened with people that had crosses on their shields.
Absolutely. I mean, we all go and we kill with God's name or Buddha's name or Allah's name. That's what they yell out just before the bombs go off.
Yeah. But if you follow what Jesus said, that doesn't fit at all. Because Jesus didn't teach to go out and try to convert people by the sword or by pressure. He simply says, tell them the message of my love, and if they receive it, then wonderful. If they don't, that's their choice. But you don't have to make them do that. You should never try. Nor should we ever, in any way hurt somebody because they reject it.
There was still this eye for an eye thing. And when you take two big buildings down in New York City and hit our Pentagon and try to hit our White House probably, there's a lot of eye-to-eye stuff, eye for an eye stuff here. And we get involved anyway. So
yeah. Well, even in Christianity, there is the principle of self-defense.
Uh-huh.
And there's, like in Romans chapter 13, it even says that duly appointed government is an instrument of God for keeping peace. And it says it doesn't bear the sword in vain. Well, you don't spank people with swords.
True, but what is seen as self-defense...
that's why you have to be sure you're not letting somebody pull the wool over your eyes.
Can be seen as offense by others. Hal Lindsey, we'll be right back. Stay right where you are. Once again, here's Hal Lindsey, and we're about to go to the phones with Hal Lindsey. Just a couple of things. Matthew in Fresno says, Art, everybody has heard the warning of the Antichrist. As soon as the Christians disappear and the bad boy appears, everyone is going to know not to follow him. It couldn't ever work. It just couldn't work. In other words, at the point that the Christians disappeared, that had come crashing in as some great reality for everybody. I suppose, and then the story would come crashing home as the absolute truth, and nobody would follow him. What about that sort of psychology?
Well, I suppose that would work, except for one factor.
And that is?
In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in the New Testament. It says about those who are going to be left, it says this. Says, and then that wicked one who shall appear, whose coming is in accordance with the activity of Satan, with all power, signs, and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved. For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence, so that they might believe the lie, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth. So it says God is going to send a deluding influence that they will believe a lie. And that's apparently the one that's going to cover this Antichrist when he comes.
Okay, well, here's one for you, Hal, and then we'll go to the phones.
Okay.
Stephen in Minneapolis says, look, only Christians are going to be saved. What about the Buddhists? They're a peaceful, loving, honest people. For the most part, that's true. In my struggle for religion, I studied Buddhism. I lived in Japan for 10 years, studied Buddhism. They are a very peaceful, loving people, and it's hard to grasp the concept, Hal, that they would be left for this horrible punishment. Explain that to me.
Well, there are a lot of people in this world who are not vicious. They're not mean. Not outwardly anyway. And yet God says that all fall short of his standard. Once man has fallen, and he did, went his own independent way, and the relationship with God was broken. Now, once that took place, the standard has to be the character of God. The only one who can be accepted by God is one who is as good as God is. and no one can qualify under that. Now, that's why God took the extreme measure of stepping out of eternity into time and becoming a man in the person of Jesus Christ, was so that he could take the judgment dictated by his own justice in the place of man and pay it in his place, and then give to man a righteousness which was equal to his if he would only accept the gift of pardon. Now, God has done everything he could do to furnish that for every person. It's free. He purchased it for them. It's absolutely free if a person will receive it. But if they turn it down, there's nothing else God can do.
What if it's not been offered, though? I mean, if they've never had the opportunity to even have it offered to them, if I could take you even today into villages in Japan and all over Southeast Asia, Hal, where it's never even been considered. It's never even been offered.
Yeah. Well, God says this, that every person comes to an awareness at some point in their life, somewhere around 12, 13 years old for sure, where God himself shows that there must be one true God. Now, if this person desires to know God, he'll move heaven and earth to get the message to them so that they will have the opportunity to receive the pardon that he purchased for them.
All right. One last question I want to hit you with, if I can. And this is from Alan in Las Vegas. Good one, too. I've had people on the air debating the Bible codes. These scholars who are claiming to find these incredible messages written in a secret code within the Bible that computers can find with mathematical probabilities and all the rest. Mm-hmm. How have you reacted to that whole controversy?
Well, I know that some of this is true, but I think it's been carried too far. I've never really gotten into it because I feel there's enough to learn just by reading the words than try to find secret meanings. And so I've just never really gotten involved in it. But I do know people who have found some basic, amazing messages that way. But I think it's something that could be abused because, it's something where it's almost like allegory. You can, if you grant that things are allegorical, well, you can let your mind be the determiner of what it means.
Huh. Well, they contend that this has always been there and that the basic message of the Bible is still all correct, and that these codes simply were there sort of like a waiting, ticking time bomb, or maybe that's wrong.
Well, I do know that the phenomenon does exist. I know that Grant Jeffries is one man that has spent a lot of time in this. Yaakov Ramsel, who is he is one I put a lot of credit in. And what this is they count there are no vowels in the original Hebrew, and so they count consonants. And what they do is, for instance, they will count every fifth consonant and see if there's a message that emerges. And as they began to do this, equidistant distances between the letters. And as they began to do this, they found amazing things took place that only a divinely inspired revelation could have hidden within it.
That's right.
And so I believe, yes, I've seen it. I'm just saying that some people started trying to carry it too far.
Okay, to the phones, I promise. First time caller line, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Good morning. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, sir.
How you doing? I've been following Hal Lindsey for quite some time.
Where are you, sir?
I'm in California.
Okay.
And my question was about the mark of the beast. Some things have kind of come to light to me recently. First of all, www, you were just talking about the Hebrew equivalent. I'm sure you know that in Hebrew, because the Jews were persecuted so much, they developed a numeric equivalent for each letter. The numeric equivalent for the Vav, or W, is 6. www 666, in my opinion, could be the mark of the beast. And also, there's a company trading on NASDAQ.
All right, well, I don't want to know the name of it. Let's stop there. Let's stop with the Internet and 666.
Okay.
What about that, Hal?
Well, it is true that the valve in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value of 6. But I don't think that's the mark. What he's talking about is in Revelation chapter 13. It says that the Antichrist is going to require everyone to swear allegiance to him as God.
And we'll have to take the mark, right?
And then if they swear allegiance to him, they will receive the prefix to their own personal number, which will be 666. And that will authorize them to buy, sell, and hold a job. Now, if they don't swear allegiance to him, they will not receive that prefix, which means that they will just be economically a non-entity. They will not be able to buy, sell, or hold a job.
Yeah, well, how far from that are we?
I think we're very close because, frankly, I think the mark, it says they will receive it either in their hand or in their forehead. I think the mark will be what do you call it? One of these little
chips.
Yeah. Right? That'll be put under the skin.
You know, I've been interviewing some scientists lately. One from Great Britain, who just had a computer chip implanted in his arm. Very interesting. Actually, connected to nerves that go to the brain in his arm, and you have to wonder. I mean, now of course they're implanting. They're implanting chips in pets, you know, just for lost pets and all the rest of it.
There are a lot of utilitarian good reasons for why something like that would be useful.
In this modern day, you bet. And if
the only thing is that the downside is it allows someone who's in charge to centralize power and gain control over everybody with a chip.
Yes, well, how far are we from it? I mean, we swipe...
Well, this is already there.
You go to the grocery,
there.
You go to the grocery store now and you swipe a card, a debit card or a bank card to pay for what you just bought. Now, how much of a jump from that is it to an even more secure chips right here in the palm of my hand? Just move your hand over the barcode reader and you can buy whatever you want.
The technology exists right now
to do it.
To have a chip that could be read from a satellite.
That's right. It does.
I mean, so that you could have your whole dossier on yourself in a chip is small enough to be under the skin, and it could be like you go into a bank and they could have a scanner that when you're 50 feet away would already tell them everything about you and appear on the computer screen.
So when you see these things happen, and you hear the news day to day, and we crawl closer toward this, you're not surprised?
Not at all. But I do want to say a lot of people have a phobia about all of these things. It doesn't become something that is lethal or something that is wrong until you're required to swear allegiance to this Antichrist in order to be able to buy and sell, and then you get this prefix.
Even I have a little of it, and I'm all that non-religious, but I look up at my, the other day I looked up at the thermometer. We've got an inside-outside thermometer. I said, hey, look, it's 66.6 degrees inside and out. Wild card line, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Hello?
Yes, I'd like to ask Hal Lindsey if he's familiar with a prophet by the name of John Leary from Rochester, New York, who talks about the mark of the beast.
East of the Rockies, call toll-free 1-800-825-5033.
Okay, well, let me just say...
out on the air, so
I'm sorry, but let me just tell you what he's saying.
Okay, again, we don't give out websites on the air.
Okay, he's confirming Hal Lindsey by saying definitely that the mark of the beast will be a microchip which keeps a record every time you buy or sell. For example, when there's a worldwide famine and a Middle East war, this will cause a need to ration food and oil. So every time you pull up to the gas tank, that chip will keep a record, and you can't cheat by saying, trying to lie and say, this is the first time I got the food or the oil, because the microchip keeps an accounting of it. So,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, so John Leary actually confirms this guy.
All right, so Hal, as conditions worsen, I mean, we're talking about disease, famine. Certainly, we can see ahead now very clearly to gas rationing again one day. He's right about all of that. All of that would...
electronic money. I mean, you could cut down crime quite a bit.
Oh, my, yes. Your whole...
all of that is coming.
Your criminal record, everything.
Yes.
Your DNA sequencing, everything could be right on a little chip. No problem. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Good morning.
Hello, Art. Hello, Hal. How are you guys doing?
Fine.
Good, thanks.
I have a question regarding the second coming and the 7-year tribulation. My understanding of Hal's writings and of some others is that once the Antichrist signs the covenant with Israel regarding them rebuilding their temple, that in a sense starts a 7-year clock to
Right.
Jesus' return.
Right.
And then I think it's Matthew 24 and some other parts of the Gospels, Jesus says that he does not know of his second coming. The angels do not know of when his second coming will be, that only the Father does. And I guess, to me, it seems like there's a contradiction there, and I'm just wondering what exactly I'm missing in my interpretation of that scripture.
Okay.
Well, number one, I don't think there's going to be a sophisticated knowledge of prophecy in the world after all the Christians are gone.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, as we're not sure that everyone will know when that covenant is signed. It may be a secret agreement.
Okay. It's not going to be like the UN general and the Israelis sign the covenant, and it's going to be on CNN. It's not going to be like that at all.
May not be.
Okay. That answers my question. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much for calling.
Thank you.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Hello.
Hi, Hal. I've got 2 quick questions for you. My first was, with modern construction equipment, how fast could the Israelis rebuild the temple to spec? And number 2 is, do you think that liberalism today is the beginnings of the strong delusion that will come over the world during the tribulation?
Well, I don't think liberalism could quite carry the enormity of what the deception that's going to come.
I mean, the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
The seed.
Yeah, I think the departure from truth, going toward relativism and away from absolute concept of truth, all of those things contribute to it. But let's see, your first question was about how quickly could that temple be built. I believe with all of the planning and the way it's been mapped out, it could be done in 6 months.
Ooh.
Wow.
So we're right on schedule then.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thanks a lot, Art.
Thank you very much. Eric in Edmonton, Canada, simply says, what would make me take the chip? My answer would be, well, hey, how about eating?
Yeah,
how long would it take you to accept the chip if it took
you absolutely couldn't make you couldn't work, you couldn't hold a job, you couldn't buy anything, you couldn't sell anything. I think that would be a pretty strong economic reason.
I wonder how far from that we could be. I mean, as I watch the headlines every day, it seems like not very far at all.
Well, the technology, the thinking toward that sort of thing, the rationale for it, it's all here. I think what it requires is that big man in Rome to come in and institute it.
Even security, Hal.
Oh, yeah.
The 2 buildings collapsed in New York, the Pentagon, and if something else of that magnitude or even worse, some sort of attack of mass destructive level were to occur here in the U.S., very quickly, even security could bring that
All right,
on us.
now, let me give you a scenario. You know how I travel a lot, so you know how they try to screen people, and they try to put them as you try to get on an airplane. Suppose everybody had a chip that told you everything about them.
Then they just line them up, read the chip.
You'd know. All I'd have to do is scan the chip. That'd be profiling in the best sense.
Well,
you'd know who's who and who's a potential terrorist.
You're always asking, how could you be driven to that? Well, one more thing like 9/11 or worse, and we could be driven to that very quickly, in my opinion.
Very quickly.
No. All right, hold tight. We're at the bottom of the hour. Well, I guess Hal Lindsey would be just the person to ask about this. Terry on Waterloo, Ontario asks, Hal, so many Christians today are turning from the pre-tribulation rapture to begin to believe in a post-tribulation rapture. My own studies lead me to this conclusion as well. What do you think?
Well, I think that people need to study why they're doing. That's why I wrote this new book called Vanished. I go into the scriptures on those things, and I believe that, if you compare scripture with scripture, you find the one position that's virtually impossible is the post-tribulation rapture. The reason is because when Christ says he comes for the believer, that every believer is snatched up to meet him and changed from mortal to immortal. Now, if that takes place at the end of the tribulation, at the second coming, that means that every living believer will have just been taken off the earth and translated into immortality. Then you run into trouble with Matthew chapter 25, where it says that the first thing Christ does when he returns to the earth in the second coming is he divides the believers from the unbelievers. Well, if the rapture had just taken place, that would have already been done.
Mm-hmm.
And only the believing survivors go into the new kingdom to repopulate the earth. If the rapture had just occurred, you'd have no mortals that could bear children. They'd all be immortals. So that's just one of the reasons I take up in my new book, The Vanished, and I think that the biggest problem is people do not know exactly what is taught about any of these views anymore. They need more study on it.
How about this? Just to throw this out, what if the rapture is in fact a nuclear war? In other words, the believers are destroyed in a nuclear holocaust, while those who remain suffer what would be better off for the dead. I mean, you'd rather be dead. They say that of a nuclear war, better to be dead than live through what would be afterwards.
Well, that's true. The only difference, though, is it's very explicit how this takes place. It says two people will be working at the mill. One will be taken, the other will be left. Two people will be in one bed. One will be taken, the other one will be left. And it says it's a sudden, instantaneous thing where it's rather a snatching away of the individual than them being killed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Nuclear weapons.
And it also says that we're translated without seeing physical death.
Mm-hmm. All right. First time caller line. You're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Good morning.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey, hi there. I'm calling you from KFI Los Angeles.
Yes, sir.
This is Joe, calling from East Los Angeles. Yes, I would like to discuss, there was a certain prophecy that Jesus stated that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the last days of man, which is referring to as the Nephilim, the necromancy of demons into the human genome.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to discuss the two prophets that were supposed to come towards the end, and the Antichrist kills the two prophets, and then the prophets are resurrected by God himself.
You just introduced a subject that takes about 10 hours to discuss. It's a really good one.
and then I want to discuss...
It's an excellent one. I wish we had time to discuss it.
And then I want to talk about the clones without souls.
Yep.
They'll be used as false prophets. So if you could also mention the head of the EU Confederation will be the Antichrist.
Well, we're probably up to about 15 hours by now. So
right. Let me just say this. May I introduce this? I have a news website. Is it okay to give that website? I didn't mention.
No, for you it certainly is.
I know what you meant about the other guy.
Right.
But I have a news website. It's called HalLindseyOracle.com. But to get it, all you have to do is just type in HalLindsey.com.
I might add, we've got a link on our website right now.
Yeah. Oh, great. We've got a link to yours.
Okay. I didn't know that. Great.
Yeah, we do. We love your site. And anyway, it's we do the news 24/7. It's not just, it's basically a news site, not a religious site. And we analyze the news. Actually,
they're one and the same, really, aren't they? In other words, the news as it unfolds.
As it is today, it is. It is today.
Yeah, that's probably why you have a link to my site.
Yeah, true.
All right, wild card line. You're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Good morning.
Hi, this is Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Listen, I have a question for Hal Lindsey regarding it's actually the confirmation of the covenant. What he's looking at is he's claiming that the covenant is made by the Antichrist. In Daniel 9:27, it's very clear this is a covenant God is confirming with us. It's already a covenant been made that He's returning and establishing His kingdom.
Oh, you're talking about the one in Daniel chapter 9, verses 26 and 7.
Yes.
Okay. He will confirm the covenant with many, is the way it's translated. Actually, the word, it means to establish a kind of security. In other words, the covenant that is mentioned in that verse is that the Antichrist is going to guarantee their security somehow.
The whole conversation, the whole subject matter of the entire chapter is talking about the covenant that God made and is ready to reestablish, to confirm. Mm-hmm. That's what all this 70 weeks is about. And
I don't dispute you on that, but what I'm saying is the sense that the Antichrist is going to give it, he'll confirm that covenant, which will start the last 7 years counting down. But the way he will confirm it is to give the Jews the sense that he's going to guarantee their security.
Okay. You mentioned earlier 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Right.
In 2 Thessalonians, he talks about the mystery of iniquity.
Yes.
And he also refers to, on the first verse, about the gathering together of the saints unto him.
Mm-hmm.
But there's two parts there. What if it's simply as in the order that he delivers it to us, that he returns, establishes his 1,000-year reign here on earth, and then at the end of everything, the rapture occurs. In other words, in the middle of the 70th week, in the middle of that, is the 1,000-year reign.
No, that wouldn't fit the whole scenario.
How do we? How are we to believe that the Bible is accurate? Hal? I mean, how do we know?
I'll tell you how. When I first believed in Jesus Christ, I was a tugboat captain and very skeptical.
Really?
Yeah. And it was in New Orleans. Had no religious background whatsoever. And so I became a believer, and I knew that something extraordinary had happened to me, because all of a sudden, after I prayed and received this gift of pardon that Jesus talked about, there was this almost instant awareness that I could understand some of the things the Bible's talking about. And I realized I'd received the spiritual birth it talks about. But I still had a problem with being able to believe the Bible was some sort of a supernatural book.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I heard a lecture at Rice University in Houston, which was my home originally, I heard this scholar speak at Rice University, and he talked about Bible prophecy. And I thought, man, that's extraordinary. He's a scholar, and he's talking about this. And he pointed out that the only book in the world that has a system of prediction and has had a 100% accuracy in fulfillment of those predictions is the Bible. So I started studying it, and that is what convinced me the Bible was the Word of God. I just saw that history proved that it had to be supernatural, because these prophets at different times would make these predictions about a certain event, and they would all come true.
That's the part.
History was the record.
Yes, reading and seeing the prophecy that has come true and is coming true worries me. I can't say that it has convinced me, but it worries me deeply.
Well, it should trouble you.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Because if the past is true, the future will be true.
East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Hello. Hello. Yes, hello.
Yeah, my name's Gary from Osseo.
Hello, Gary. Yes.
Hi, Hal.
Hi.
Art.
Hi.
My grandmother, she's kind of a prophetess lady. She throws her hands up and speaks in tongues and all this, but she taught me that, now, Art, you asked a question earlier about how does the United States fit into all this?
Yeah, that's right.
I forget all this, she told me, but she said that the United States is Ephraim. Are you familiar, Hal?
I'm familiar with that, yeah.
Manasseh? How the younger brother got the greater blessing. Well, it only makes sense that the United States is that? But anyways, can you say anything on that matter of Ephraim and Manasseh, how we fit into that picture?
All right. Well, you said you studied very carefully, Hal, how we might fit in, and you haven't been able to find anything.
Well, see, that, in other words, there's no way to, if you say that the United States is Ephraim, that's something that's allegorical. I mean, there's no way to support that other than it's your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If you take these other prophecies, like it talks about the army from the extreme east that will come from east of the Euphrates into the Middle East. Well, you know that's Asia. Or you take the nation that is to the extreme north of Israel. You can pin down, there's only one nation there. Or the revived Roman Empire, the culture and the essential culture and people that was once Roman Empire. Out of that would come 10 nations. Well, right away you know that it's most likely Europe, because the capital is definitely predicted to be Rome. So, you know, those sort of things you can pin down. But to say Ephraim is the son of Joseph, who was one of the sons of Jacob, and he had children while he was in Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim, those two sons. And they became a part of the inheritance of Israel. So they are actually Jews. It couldn't be the United States.
If we were to suddenly, and this is something discussed frequently, of course, on my program, but if we were to suddenly discover that there are others in the universe.
Yes.
And I don't know how that would occur. We'd get a signal, you know, or however it might occur. But we were to be aware now. Suddenly there were others. How would that fit in with biblically with creation? Would there be a problem with it all? Would there be a moment when you would say to yourself, "I don't understand how this fits in, how it can be"?
Well, you know, the Bible says the secret things belong to the Lord, but those that are revealed belong to us and to our children. Well, you know, I'm sure there's secret things out there we don't know about.
I'm sure.
And yet, we don't have to go too far out into space to be aware of the fact the Bible does tell us that there are beings of enormous powers that are involved on this planet other than mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And they carry an interest, and the certain ones of these beings called angels that are fallen are much more lethal than anything you could imagine that might be out there in the galaxies, because these are beings the Bible tells us have enormous power.
There are also discoveries being made here on Earth right now at an incredibly rapid pace. Underwater cities that may be as far as 2,200 feet under the water off the coast of Cuba, off India, Okinawa, all over the world.
Off Egypt, too.
In India. I mean, just all over the world, yes, off Egypt as well, that may lead some to believe that, the history as we thought it was isn't. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, that's true, and I believe that is true.
You do?
Yeah. I mean, their history is certainly older than what Bishop Ussher used to say, 4,004 years before, I think it was the birth of Abraham. But history is certainly older than that. The Bible doesn't say anything that would lead us to believe that it's limited to that. I mean, I think that man is probably 50,000 years old or something like that from the time of his creation.
But there are many Christians who believe 6,000 years is it.
No, there's nothing in the Bible that demands that. There are genealogies, but that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't gaps in the tracing of those genealogies. For instance, Jesus is called the son of David. Well, look how many generations are between David and Jesus.
Indeed. All right, we might have time for one more. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Hal Lindsey. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure, where are you?
I'm outside Chicago in a suburb.
All right.
I have followed Mr. Lindsay's writings, and I greatly enjoy them. I also wanted to hark back to a comment that you made earlier about the Muslim martyrs who are promised 77 virgins in heaven to defile when they get there.
Mm-hmm.
And as a very fundamentalist Christian, I believe in the New and the Old Testament, and I think the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran are the three books that represent the three basic or greatest faiths in the world.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, our heaven is not populated with men who are being allowed to defile women who have no role other than to be defiled. We are a faith that is equally loving and forgiving and worshipful of women as it is of men. But in the Quran, the women are objectified.
Mm-hmm.
They are treated as nothing more than a gift that the
may I say something here?
Yes.
If you will notice, there's a great deal of similarity between the way Mormonism originated and the way the Muslim religion originated.
I was going to bring in the Book of Mormon as well because
they both have a concept of heaven that are very fleshly.
Joseph Smith was a cousin of mine on a very distant level, and we don't own up to that very often.
Listen, dear, I hate to do it, but I've got to cut you off. We're running woefully short of time here, i.e. the program is ending. I want to, again, your series of tapes is available at a phone number right now. 24-hour number?
No, it's not 24. It's, I'm sorry, it's 9 to 5 West Coast time.
9 to 5. It's 1-800-TITUS-35.
That's right.
That's 1-800-TITUS-35. Or, put another way, 1-800-848-8735. That's 1-800-848-8735.
And they can order it through the website, by the way.
As well.
Yeah, HalLindsey.com. Everything is available through the website.
Well, every single program I've ever done with you has been astounding, and this one no exception.
And likewise, I really enjoy it, Art. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal, and good night.
Good night.